Hello, my name is Anne-Marie Cannon, and I'm the host of Armchair Historians. What's your favorite history? Each episode begins with this one question. My guests come from all walks of life and are people who get really excited about a particular time, place, or person from our distant or not-so-distant past. The jumping-off point is where they become curious, then enter the rabbit hole into discovery, some through scholarly research, others through pop culture, documentaries, and other podcasts. We look at history through the filter of other people's eyes. Armchair Historians is a Belgian Rabbit production. Stay up to date with us through Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help to spread the word. Wherever you listen to your podcast, that is where you'll find us. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also find us at armchairhistorians.com. Armchair Historians is an independent podcast. If you'd like to support the show, become a patron through Patreon or buy us a cup of coffee through Ko-fi. Links to both in the episode notes. This is a story about World War II and Nazis, about a little girl who should not have had to think about jumping into ditches on the way to the train station because German artillery planes are plowing down everything in sight. It's about a mother who waits, almost too long, to save her children from an all too familiar horror. It will be this mother's second time watching helplessly as a foreign invader crosses over the border, seizing control of her country. Sounds like something out of a World War II newsreel or an old black and white film about the Nazi invasion of Belgium, right? The thing is, it's neither of those things. This is a story about my own family. The little girl is my mother. The mother is my grandmother. Even as I say the words, it's hard for me to get my head around. I mean, that's my mom, right? At the tender age of 7, she knew the Germans were bad news. She played with her brothers near the statue, the one her aunt had put there to remind everybody what happened the last time the Germans came through Belgium.
Oh, I got something else interesting to talk about.
That's my mom, Therese. We're having lunch in an Indian restaurant. She's agreed to be recorded for this. I say, let's just get used to having this thing on and press the record button. Neither one of us have ever done or been interviewed before. We try to act normal. It takes a while, but then we forget that we're being taped. My mother begins telling me about this woman she met at a tavern near her house in Pittsburgh.
She's fluent in French if she's teaching French.
I hate to tell you this, but there are people who teach languages who are not as fluent as they could be.
So she's fluent in French?
Yeah. And
the woman, a high school French teacher, wants my mother to come and speak to her class. French is my mother's native tongue. She would tell them about being French and growing up in Belgium and France during World War II. We both comment on how it reminds us of the time she went to speak to a high school class at the request of one of my friends, Nancy.
you know, if I would, she wants me to talk to her
Oh,
kids.
just like Nancy Rolfe.
Yes.
Remember that?
I know. And my answer is, sounds familiar. Well, sounds that before. I said,
I remember how that single event made me take notice of my mother. I was 13, at an age when the last thing I wanted was to be associated with the two people who had been raising me all those years. And here was one of my best friends, wanting nothing more than to bring one of them in for show and tell. To tell you the truth, I was kind of annoyed by the whole thing. It was a high school history class, and my mother told them about what it was like to grow up during the war. I remember she got all dressed up, wore one of her Pendleton suits even. As I look back on it, I think I was jealous of the connection my mom made with Nancy, watching them walking into our house together, all bubbly and laughing over the incredible afternoon they just spent. The thing about it, though, it put my mother on my radar. I listened to Nancy tell me the stories of my own mother's childhood, as had been recanted to her high school history class that day. Stories I'd never been privy to. Whether my mother withheld them from me or I just never bothered to ask doesn't really matter. For the first time in my life, I was starting to know the legacy of my heritage and the truth about a reality I will never be able to fully grasp. And that is what it was like to be a 6-year-old little girl, afraid to go to the bathroom, alone, because she was afraid the Germans would come while she was in there.
J'ai allumé le feu, mes chagrins, mes plaisirs. Je n'ai plus besoin de balayer mes amours avec leur trémolo, balayer pour toujours. Je repars à zéro. Non, rien de rien. Non. Je ne regrette rien, ni le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal.
Meantime, in Belgium, the whole force of Nazi blitzkrieg had stormed across its neutral borders.
This is a clip from the 1943 newsreel/propaganda film Conquer and Divide.
The anchor of which was Fort Eben Amael, a modern and seemingly impregnable fortress. The Germans had secretly built a replica of the mighty fortress in Czechoslovakia and had rehearsed the attack until they knew every detail of the fort's construction and its every weakness. When the real attack came, it was foolproof. Parachute troops, dive bombers.
The film was produced by the United States Office on War Information, OWI for short. The OWI existed from 1942 to 1945. It was responsible for, among other things, selling the war to Americans and promoting patriotism.
1940, that Germany invaded Belgium, if I'm correct.
Okay.
I was short of the 8, but I've always said I was 7 years old. That's what I was. And it was May when the Germans were just at the frontier of Belgium that we left on the last refugees train because my grandmother...
Meantime, an hour and a half after the German invasion began, Allied troops crossed the French and Belgian border to meet the advancing Germans. As they raced across Belgium to take up their defense positions, they met an obstacle they hadn't counted on. Refugees. And the refugee-choked roads didn't get that way by accident. The Nazis methodically bombed little towns and villages, otherwise devoid of any military value. Not so much to kill as to drive the inhabitants out onto the highways. Then, by expert machine gunning, the Nazis would herd them along in terror-stricken flight to hopelessly entangle the advancing Allied armies. Refugees used as a weapon of war, a new low in inhumanity.
The Germans invaded Belgium on May 10th, 1940. My mom was 7, and they used her, along with all the other Belgian refugees, as a pawn in their war. I'm sure the atrocities that befell Belgium just 26 years earlier at the hands of the German military in World War I, still fresh in the memories of people like my grandmother, only helped to fuel the exodus
Yeah.
You know
And
what
now,
I-
where was your father again?
Well, my father was drafted in the French army. He was French.
He was French. Your mother was Belgium?
Well, yeah, they were both living in Belgium, but my father was still.
What was their nationality of their
What?
family? What was the nationality of their family? Were they...
I am not
Your mom.
100% sure. My mom was 100% Belgian.
Is that what they call people who are
Belgian.
Belgian?
Belge.
Belge.
Yeah, B-E-L-G-E, Belge. But, okay, in English it's Belgian. And my father, I think his father was French, and, it's too complicated for me. Although I think he himself adopted the French nationality at some point.
Your dad? Or your
Yeah,
grandfather?
and he was in the service.
Did you know your parents, your father's parents?
No,
Yeah.
my father was an orphan, the way I understand it. And where was I? Okay, so my father was in the French army. And that's when he went. He left for France to join his regiment that we moved in with my grandmother.
Okay, so let me stop the tape here, just to reiterate this complicated non-fiction plot twist. My grandfather, who is in the midst of getting discharged from the reserves, is called up to active duty just as a world war is breaking out. Not only is he called to active duty, he's in the military of a totally different country than the one his family, meaning his wife and kids, reside in. I mean, we're not even sure if he's French, let alone know why he's in the French reserves and not Belgium's. All right, so my grandfather goes off to France, and my mom, her brothers, and her mom move in with my mother's grandmother. That's her mother's mother, who refuses to leave the country even though she knows the Nazis are making their way into it. My mom's mother will not leave without her mother.
So then finally, your grandmother decides to go.
Yeah, at the last minute she came with us.
And what was that? What did that entail? Going, like, leaving? Like,
Well, it was we called the last train, and we walked from my grandmother's house to the railroad station in Dinant. The road was along the Meuse, and there was German planes, small ones that were coming along and who used their
artillery.
Well, anyway, they were shooting on anything that moved, and there were people killed. And every time we'd hear them, we'd throw ourselves in the gully and didn't move.
Really?
So they wouldn't see us and shoot at us.
Did you see any dead people?
No. It happened, we found out later they were on the other side of the river. Or we may even have found out when we get to the railroad station. I don't remember.
So how do you know you were the last train out?
Because we had been told it was the last one that was going to leave. Anyway, but I know along the way there were air raid alert and
While you were on the train?
Yeah.
How long were you on the train for? About, I mean...
At least overnight, because we stopped when they knew there was air raid coming. We went to air raid shelters.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
You were actually taken off the train and went into
Yes.
air raid shelters from the train, and this was while you were en route to France.
To wherever they were going to take. Well,
you
it
didn't
was
really have a choice of where you were going.
Well, it was going to France. We were almost at the French border. Dinant is not far from the French border. We were going south, so it had to be France. So, but anyway, we were luckier than like my cousin Renee. They walked. They were refugee, and They
Where
were
were
walking.
they? Where were they?
Well, they were living in Visé, which is closer to the northern French border, to the Belgian border.
Northern Belgium and Germany border?
Not Germany, I forgot which country it is way up there, between Belgium and Holland.
Okay, so I just did the math. My mother's cousin and her family would have had to walk approximately 95 miles from the town of Visé, Belgium, just to get to the French border.
The story very well, but a lot of people, you know,
And that was Renee Oubion.
yes, with her brothers and sister and her mother and father.
And Renee was resistance in the resistance somehow.
Well, later when they came back to, we left and we stayed in France.
Okay.
My mother and the kids. My grandmother went back to Belgium after things settled a little bit. After a couple of months, she went back to Belgium.
And it was being occupied. Belgium was occupied by the Nazis by that time.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was occupied right after we left.
And then when you were in France, how long till the Nazis occupied?
Well, they were right on our heels. I don't know how many days.
It wasn't long after you got into France
No.
with the Nazis.
And I mean, we went as far as Paris, and at Paris they put people in different trains, and we just happened to be going southwest, and we landed up in a town called La Roche-sur-Yon, and that's where they had tent city that was erected in the middle of the town square. That was a huge one, probably the size of a football field.
Remember the statue? The one my mother used to play by? That reminded everybody what happened the first time the Germans came through Belgium? Well, the year was 1914, during the month of August, at the beginning of World War I, early in the invasion of Belgium. They were in Neuf, a suburb of Dinant, along the Meuse River. People from the neighborhood were hiding, huddled together in a narrow tunnel under the railroad tracks, near the approach of Dinant's railroad station. The German soldiers, using machine guns, shot and killed 44 innocent men, women, and children. Those who survived were buried under the dead. My grandmother's aunt and 2 of her 5 children survived. The other 3, aged 9, 15, and 16, plus her husband, were among the dead. She donated a parcel from her property bordering the railroad to erect a monument naming all the casualties of this massacre. It is still standing today. The entrance of the tunnel has been permanently closed. It is a statue that my mother used to play by.
Ça commence avec toi.
This is by no means the end of my mother's harrowing journey through World War II. It is just our stopping point for now. This snippet constitutes the end of my mother's innocent childhood, the first of many losses she would be forced to endure throughout the subsequent 5 years of the war. 5 years in which the sweet, curious essence of a young, golden-haired child is replaced by the tenacity of stone, the material of enduring architecture. Like a medieval French cathedral, my mother is a survivor in the truest sense of the word. At 79, Therese shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. We're planning a trip to Belgium this winter, she and I, where she hopes to show me Dinant, the home of innocence and the road on which she lost it, the one to the last train out of Belgium.